Top 10 African countries with the highest white population. Hello explorers, welcome back to another informative video presented to you by Displore, and thanks for watching. In this video we shall be counting down the top 10 African countries with the highest white population. The long-term projection suggests the population of Africa will double in 2050, and there are more than 2,100 different languages spoken among more than 3,000 distinct ethnic groups and races, which include a small white population. Of the estimated 1.3 billion people who are living on the black continent, less than 1% of white European descent, and some countries tend to have a greater population of white Europeans than others have. European imperialism peaked a bit less than 2 centuries ago when Europeans expanded their holdings all across the globe, including Africa. The first white settlements date to the 16th centuries, like Luanda in Angola, Cape Verde and Sao Tome Island, as well as the Dutch East India companies stationed at Cape Good Hope in South Africa from 17th century. By 1985, only one-tenth of the African continent was independent, but some of the Europeans still stayed in Africa and form a good percentage of certain countries. When it comes to the white people in today's Africa, most of them are descendants of the European colonists known as white Africans of European ancestry, even though there are also white people who decided to move to Africa in the last 2 decades, finding Africa a beautiful place for living. In addition, there are white missionaries, also called white fathers, who are born in Africa and are committed to solving problems of black Africans. However, the situation is a bit different when it comes to the northern parts of the continent due to migrations of the human population during history and black and Arab mixing. If you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily uploads. So without any further ado, here are the top 10 African countries with the highest white population. Number 10. Mozambique, 0.15% or 45,000 people. The first permanent Portuguese communities in the region were established in the 16th century. Mozambique is a country that welcomed a number of white farmers who moved there from Zimbabwe as a consequence of the controversial land reform in that country. Mozambique is home to Mozambican-born descendants of Portuguese settlers. Portuguese is the official language and lingua franca of Mozambique. Their dialect, called Mozambican Portuguese, is closer to standard European Portuguese. Hence, the white population of Mozambique is a result of the descendants of the colonial period and also immigrants from Zimbabwe. Number 9. Botswana, 3% or about 70,800 whites. As early as 1815, individual Afrikaners had begun to arrive in what is today modern Botswana, mainly traders and ivory hunters from the Cape of Good Hope. Botswana, a southern African landlocked country, is known as one of Africa's most exclusive safari destinations. Once under the British protectorate, the country is now independent, and it's been like that for more than half a century, but some of its former protectorates still inhabit the country. Botswana's white population consists of British, Dutch descendants, and also there is quite a large community of Serbs, a nation of South Slavic people from Balkans in Europe, including families of Yugoslavia's immigrants who came in the country more than 50 years ago. Presently, white Africans are a minority ethnic group in Botswana, accounting for 3% of the country's population. The white population usually speaks Afrikaans as well as other European languages, most notably English. Number 8. Kenya, 0.2% of Kenya's population, or about 103,500 whites. From East Africa, Kenya, that sits on the equator, also has a significant white population in its total population. The country's population is very diverse, while beside Kiswahili, English is also its official language. European colonization of the country began in the 19th century, with the British Empire establishing the East Africa Protectorate. Almost 80 years after, the Independent Republic of Kenya is formed. Over the past few years, there's been bad blood between white landowners and black people of Kenya, since drought caused people to struggle over the available water for their livestock, while more than 65% of the country's arable land is in the hands of 36 white settlers. Such conflicts might result in the same land reforms that took place in Zimbabwe, but for now, the bad blood still exists. Number 7. Morocco, 0.3% of Moroccan population, or about 109,400 whites. This largely mountainous country in the north of the continent, which is the 7th of African countries with the largest white population, has both Mediterranean and Atlantic coastlines. The Berbers make the majority of its population, being inhabited there for the last 5 millennia. The Arabs conquered this land in the 7th century and then again in the 21st century. When it comes to its white population, it's mainly consisting of French, even though before the country gained its independence, it was settled by more than 500,000 Europeans. Most of the Europeans left after the country gained its independence, but it still has a high population of whites. Number 6. Tunisia. 1% of Tunis population, or about 117,400 whites. Being a major trade center in the Mediterranean for centuries, this rather small country at the northernmost point of Africa has a quite interesting history. It's another African country with the largest white population that's inhabited by Berbers since ancient times. From Phoenicians who founded Carthage to Romans, Ottoman Empire, and finally French colonizers in 1881, the country and its people had been witnessing constant changes. Besides Arab Berbers, the country is also inhabited by French and a significantly smaller number of Italians. France colonized Tunisia in 1881. French nationals immigrated to Tunisia and the Italians kept coming. Together, they make up Tunisia's white population. Number 5. Madagascar. 0.5% of the population, or about 133,000 whites. This island country in the Indian Ocean is home to a large number of French people, even though the first Europeans to set foot on the island was Diogo Diaz, a Portuguese sea captain, in 1500 on his way to India after being blown off course. The country has an interesting blend of Asian and African landscapes, and the same can be said when it comes to the origins of the Malagasy people. During history, they've been pretty hostile when it comes to European settlers since their attempts in establishing trading settlements have failed. Finally, in 1896, France annexed Madagascar after the British gave up their claims to the island. The communities of white in the country are descended from French settlers who arrived in Madagascar during the 19th century. Madagascar is home to a significant community of French people, of whom the vast majorities are born in Madagascar and are descended from former settlers and colonists from France who settled in Madagascar during the 19th and 20th centuries. They constitute a minority ethnic group of Madagascar. There are also reports of English population in Madagascar, but very few in numbers. Number 4. Namibia. 6.6% of the population, or about 168,000 of whites. The Southwest became a German colony during the late 19th century, and with the onset of the First World War, a number of local Boers volunteered to serve with the imperial authorities against invading Allied troops. After the conflict left the territory under South African occupation, thousands of French Afrikaner migrants poured into the region to occupy available plots of prime stock farming land and exploit untapped resources. Their government further encouraged new settlements by offering easy loans, necessary infrastructure, and more expropriate land to white newcomers. This policy was generally considered a success, as Southwest Africa's white population more than doubled between 1913 and 1936. Current estimates for the Afrikaner population in Namibia range from 60,000 to 120,000. They continue to make up the majority of the country's white citizens. 45% of the best-ranging and agricultural land is presently owned by Namibians of European background, mostly Afrikaner ranchers. Number 3. Zambia. 1% of the population, or about 176,000 whites. The sub-Saharan African country, Zambia, is a home to thousands of white people from South Africa and the United Kingdom. At the brink of the country's independence in 1964, there were roughly 70,000 Europeans, mostly British, in Zambia, making up roughly 2.3% of the 3 million inhabitants at the time. Zambia had a different situation compared to other African countries. It included segregation similar to South Africa, Rhodesia or Zimbabwe, and Southwest Africa or Namibia. But as the Europeans constituted a smaller fraction of the population, they did not dominate politics. There were a few cities in northern Rhodesia that had British place names, but all except one, Livingstone, were changed when the country became independent or soon after. The country also welcomed white farmers who had been expelled from Zimbabwe by supporters of Robert Mugabe, a Zimbabwean politician and revolutionary, as well as former prime minister and president, which increased the white population of the country. Moreover, a few years ago, Mr. Guy Scott, a democratic politician, became the country's first white interim president. Number 2. Angola. 1% of the population, or about 310,000 whites. There were originally around 2,000 Afrikaners in Angola, descendants of those who had survived Namibia's unforgiving Dawsland trek. For 50 years, they formed a distinct enclave in the underdeveloped Portuguese territory, joined by new Afrikaner migrants in 1893 and 1905. In 1928, however, the South African authorities arranged to have 300 such households repatriated to Aljo, where they were settled comfortably into farming. From the first white settlement in the late 16th century to the beginning of the 20th century and the vast territory known as present-day Angola, Portuguese influence is evident in this country. The wars between supporters of white colonial politics on the one side and anti-colonial nationalist movement on the other caused many people to flee the country during the second half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, including Angola's white population. The predominantly white population in Angola is Portuguese. However, they are a minority ethnic group, making up 1% of the country's population. Number 1. South Africa, 9.2% of the population, or about 5.3 million whites. In the late 16th century, the Dutch East India Company, known more formally as the Verenigde Oostindische Company, or VOC, began routinely searching for sites on the African continent where its trading fleets could obtain fresh water and other supplies while en route to the Orient. As a result of that, Dutch ships began calling at the Cape of Good Hope as early as 1595, since the shoreline was not treacherous and fresh water could be easily obtained by landing parties without venturing too far inland. And finally, South Africa ended up as the top African country with the largest white population, as they did not get only water, but they also settled many citizens here. After Portuguese navigators Bartolomeu Dias and Vasco da Gama discovered the south of the continent, the first colony is founded at Cape Town by Dutch East India Company in 1652. By the end of the 18th century, it became a British colony, only to be returned to Dutch a few years later. The conflicts between the British Empire and Boer settlers, the descendants of the Dutch settlers, culminated by the beginning of the 20th century in the South African War, when Boers were defeated in 1902. The second half of the 20th century was colored with racial segregation and the rule of white minority known as apartheid. In 1994, Nelson Mandela, the first black president of South Africa, put an end on violence and racial segregation, leading the way in the peaceful transition to a rule of the majority. White South Africans are by far the largest European-descended population group in Africa. South Africa's white population is divided into 61% Afrikaans speakers, 36% English speakers, and 3% who speak another language, such as Portuguese and Dutch. The greatest concentration of white South Africans appears in Gauteng, which includes Johannesburg and Pretoria, and the Western Cape, which includes Cape Town. There you have it, explorers. Those were the top 10 African countries with the highest white population. Thanks for watching this video. If you want us to cover any of your top 10 topics, leave your suggestions in the comments and we will do well to grant your request. Also, if you did enjoy this video, do well to give it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe and share with your friends.